Eric Peeney, thanks again for joining us. It's always so insightful. Before we jump in and talk about all of the changes in the grant funding landscape, maybe just give us a quick overview of who you are and Ryan and what you folks do for Canadian companies.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure as always. My name's Eric Peeney. I am a director of client services over at Ryan LLC. So I guess the easy way to put it would be we're a tax consulting firm. We have a few different service areas, but I'm on the government funding team here at Ryan. So specifically dealing with government funding programs, grants, loans from both the federal and provincial government. Been with the company for a few years. We write about 1,000 applications a year. Going in at about an 80% success rate across the board. So got a very knowledgeable team behind me when it comes to targeting and writing these grant applications.
So when we spoke in November, December, I can't remember what it was, we broke down a whole whack of government funding programs that were available to Canadian businesses, manufacturers, distributors, service providers. Whole bunch of stuff was in flux. I think it was shortly after Prime Minister Carney kind of read out the budget. And we're only a few short months later, but it seems like a lot has changed. There are new funding programs available. There are additional supply chain shocks in the world. The tariff story continues to change day after day. We know that the Canadian US Mexico trade agreement is up for renegotiation this summer. So, what I want to do is kind of take your temperature on things that have changed, some support that may be new that wasn't there a few months ago, and some new programs that had been in effect, had closed down, and maybe are reopening again. So, talk us through what's gone on in the last couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's definitely a direct correlation drawn between, what happens, in the world, and then what we see released on the government funding side of things. And we've seen even, the budgets have been released, but we've seen even a few off of the cuff programs that are kind of reactive to, updates or what's happening in the world. So over the past few months, yes, the tariff programs are still front and center for the most part, right? Those are available nationally to any company in Canada. That'll be the prevalent program, I'd say, for the next 6 to 8 months, just because the sheer amount of dollars that the federal government has allotted to that program. So it was $1 billion nationally,
Wow.
for the tariff program, and now we're starting to see little niche kind of pockets of that money roll out. I know that we discussed in the past about different industries, but agri-food for one, they've earmarked $130 million of that tariff money strictly for agri-food. 500 million for Ontario-based companies, as that's where the largest concentration is. But that program is available nationwide. And it's good in the sense that, and I had a meeting earlier this week, and I kind of stepped back and took a look at it, where typically, those four buckets of funding that we focus on: hiring and training, CapEx, R&D, marketing and export. That regional tariff response initiative program kind of encompasses all of them, right? We can include CapEx in there, software implementations, as well as equipment and machinery purchases, hiring and training, and marketing and export, as well into that program. So it's really an all-encompassing program, and it goes towards supporting, employee salaries, as well as some of those larger CapEx costs too. So yeah, that's still the front and center programs. We've seen some niche programs roll out as well, more specifically in the agri-food sector, as well as the OAMP program, which is coming to an end in a couple of weeks, specifically towards automotive. But yeah, that regional tariff program is definitely still front and center for the government funding initiative. So.
So we got a client, for example, and let's just use this as an example. They've been impacted significantly by tariffs. They've been impacted top line basis because, the orders from the US are slowing, and then they're impacted operationally. Now they've got to implement all of these processes to support country of origin tracking. They've got to change their invoice forms and calculations, and they may even need to restructure their supply chains and the way they
Yep.
run fulfillment out of their warehouses. How do these types of programs come in and support those internal initiatives?
Yeah, and I mean that's you nailed it on the head in terms of what those programs are actually even specifically looking for. So I mean to qualify for the tariff program, what their step one would be tariff impacts, right? And
Okay.
obviously the biggest indicator would be revenue loss. But we can look at more indirect impacts. I mean, I have a few clients who have longer sales cycles, right? Where they haven't necessarily been hit hard right when everything was announced in April, but you're beginning to quote less from US based customers. You're incurring costs both on inputs and outputs. So once we have those impacts down, then the project would be tied directly to those impacts. What are we going to do to offset or mitigate those damages from the tariffs, right? Are we optimizing our supply chain? Are we, making changes to our production efficiencies to lower end costs for our clients? So really, it's all just about how the project ties into the impacts, and is very, very broad in terms of what they'll support. But that supply chain diversification is a great example of a project that they would support for sure. So
Okay, that's good to know.
yeah,
And other programs that many of our clients pursued last year, particularly ones relating to digital transformation, new ERP systems and best practice business processes, getting organized for the eventual kind of deployment of AI solutions. These were the DMAP and TDP programs. So we had clients go in and they'd apply for an initial wave of funding to support a digital technology assessment that provides kind of an assessment of opportunities and roadmaps to
yep,
get there and things like that. The follow-on programs were these technology demonstration programs that would actually provide grant funding for a pretty good chunk of change
yep.
to support the deployment of those recommendations, the implementation. Can you talk through a little bit about where those programs stand today and what you're hearing?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And exciting news on that. And because I think that
Okay.
the last, so DMAP closed even earlier than TDP, right? But I believe that that was the last time we saw one of those open was probably the early fall, maybe, or maybe even late summer it was, right? It was quite a while back before those closed. We did just hear an announcement from the provincial government that that similar programs or those two programs, we don't have exact details yet, will be opening up soon within, I'd say, the coming weeks to month, which is exciting news for everyone who wanted to target DMAP and TDP in the past, that we should see, there's funding allotted towards, those digital implementations coming up. So again, will it be, something, it might do some rejigging. It might not be named DMAP or TDP, but it may, for all we know, still be called DMAP or TDP. All we know, though, is that funding is being allotted towards programs such as those. So expect probably, one or two programs to open up in the coming weeks to month that are DMAP and TDP-esque. So, which is very exciting, right?
That is very exciting. So compared to, some of the tariff related funding, our experience and I think your advice to us and to our clients has been, hey, these are great programs, get ahead of them because, there's a little bit of a lead time, there's some bureaucracy in terms of reporting and stuff like that. So you kind of have to get organized. Our experience and our clients' experience with the DMAP programs is that there's way less red tape. So the approval process is quicker. It's easier to get the funds released and then to, qualify for the next round. TDP is probably a little bit longer from a lead time perspective than DMAP. These have been hugely beneficial to our clients, particularly manufacturing companies that are looking for funds to offset the costs of deploying large scale transformations. And we're talking about pretty good chunks of change.
Yeah,
On the TDP side, I think it was last year up to $150,000. That cuts into significantly the cost of an implementation, particularly for a small mid-sized business. And then if you think about layering on things like training grants and hiring grants and these other programs, well, there's some good support to help companies modernize.
absolutely, for sure, John. And like you said, the turnaround time on those two programs is great. I mean, for a DMAP program, you're looking at, 3 to 4 weeks turnaround.
Yeah.
CDP a little bit longer, could be around 8 or so weeks, so a couple of months. But all in between the two programs, with less than 3 months to access that kind of funding. And again, it is 50% of project costs up to 150K for TDP for the actual implementation of those, of that digital recommendations from that $15,000 DMAP grant that you can get from, preferred vendor to come in, such as Pemeco. Then yeah, absolutely, it's great program. And again, coupled with the hiring and training grants, which again, so training, we can kind of get into that a little bit. So again, it is
Yeah.
exciting news for DMAP and TDP, and hopefully we see those open up in the coming weeks. And again, I mean, what's today that we're filming on April 2nd? So commencement of the new government fiscal year, right? So expect a lot of programs to be opening up again in the coming weeks, not just the TDP or DMAP programs, but just across the board, right? So, but in terms of hiring and training, again, a big influx of cash has been committed to these programs from the federal government. I think it was in the tune of $400 million. What they did, so they made this announcement. It was late in the year last year, I think late November, early December. They kind of put on pause nationwide all of the training grants. And I think that they're doing a little bit of rejigging with those programs to open back up. But again, April 1st now has just passed. So we should expect to see those training grants open up again across the board nationwide. Hiring grants are kind of still running status quo. So those are opening up, gearing up for, summer term, or we should see some of those full-time hiring recent graduate positions opening up as well, those streams. So definitely more focused, and like you said, less bureaucracy and red tape with those programs, easier to access, right? It's a good way to get your foot in the door to access some government funding. So, and those programs are in place for a reason, right? Might as well take advantage of them. So,
Yeah, no doubt. And those training and hiring grants, in our experience, are hugely valuable. So if a company embarks on a major business process transformation project or an ERP project or a supply chain revamp project, what they end up doing operationally is they're pulling some of the key people out of the day jobs to actually work on these internal projects.
yeah,
Well, someone's got to do the work in the business, or maybe
yeah,
they need to fill roles of kind of lower level, entry level business analyst, data analyst, process analyst types on these projects. And these funds go a long way in terms of building up that staffing capacity, either to support day-to-day operations, project requirements, or a little bit of both. So looking forward to seeing where those things shake out. A couple
absolutely.
minutes ago, Eric, you kind of walked through very quickly the Ontario Automotive Modernization Program and that grant program. With a huge automotive supply chain here in Ontario, can you talk a little bit about what that program does, what the status is?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And we still have time, to apply to it. So I'm not sure when this is going to be released, but I mean, even within a week or so of the deadline, which I believe is April 17th,
Okay.
and that's an annually recurring program as well, right? So, if you miss it this time around, you could be quite certain that'll come out. And who's to say also on top of that we won't see another similar program out there because the automotive sector has been so impacted, right? And again,
Yeah.
with CUSMA being revisited in July, who knows what new programs, like I said, some of those off of the cuff programs where we had no idea this would be coming before, but it's kind of a reactive program that they released to kind of deal with, updates at what's happening politically, right? So, online program, great program, and they'll provide 50% of costs up to 150K. And again, it's for those software and hardware implementations just to
Wow.
modernize your operations, right? Create efficiencies in your productions, in your operations. And yeah, it's a great program out there. And again, it's a little, I'd say, a little bit, easier to access when you have more focused project as opposed to a large scale RTRI project, right? So, yeah, great for those software and hardware implementations to optimize your operations.
So, if we've got a client who really wants to optimize its shop floor and its production processes or its material handling processes, get better handle on working capital and inventory and stuff like that, are those the types of programs that would qualify?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great project fit for OAMP right there. And you can begin to incur. So the project can begin the day after the intake deadline. So you don't have to
Okay.
wait, months and months and months down the road for approval because that program is a little bit on the slower end to approve. I'd expect, a 4 to 5 month turnaround when you hear back from them. So they are, the provincial programs sometimes can be a little bit notoriously slow in the review process. But that doesn't mean that the project can't begin. So I always recommend to my clients, you're moving forward this implementation regardless, right? That program is there to access, target the program, but you can begin the project the day after intake deadline, which will be April 18th onwards. You can begin to incur those costs. So
That's interesting because a lot of the other programs won't let you start until you've received approval. Here, they're saying they're able to take kind of the invoices and the project descriptions and all of that collateral after the fact and submit it for reimbursement or grant funding. That's pretty cool. So they
absolutely,
recognize, yeah, yeah.
they had in the past, I believe and I think it was on for a couple of intakes where again it was no no project spend until approval from the program, right? But because it was taking so long, it really did have a negative impact on
Right.
these companies that were prioritizing these projects that needed to move forward. I had a couple of examples for this recent intake where, they've received new contracts, from, GM or Stellantis, whoever it may be, and they need to get the ball rolling now because these implementations need to
Right.
be up and operational within the next, 6 to 8 months, right? So I think that the program realized that time is of the essence with these implementations, and now we can begin the project right after the intake deadline. And it does vary project to project. When can you begin to spend? That's something that my team and I can help assist with. It kind of when we're project scoping initially. When can the projects commence? When can we begin putting in those POs, right? Because you don't want to lose the deposit for that piece of software, that piece of equipment or machinery that you're looking to implement. So yeah, it's something that my team can assist with navigating because it does vary program to program.
Yeah, look, it's a step in the right direction. If any of the
It's
program administrators are watching this, the next step is let's try to get those lead times a little bit shorter because we still have many clients that can't self-fund a lot of these projects. They've got so much else on the go. They've been impacted by tariffs. So really, really good first step to allow people who can actually cash flow these things to start. But let's see if we can get this a little bit tighter. Um,
Absolutely. I've seen, and what we've seen the review process being refined, in the programs, specifically stating that they're looking to refine those, which is great news. And again, example, and the federal programs are always great for that. And that are going back to that RTRI program would be a great example where, such a large application, yet, you're seeing turnarounds within, approvals within a couple of months, right? Which is usually unheard of. So hopefully, everyone catches on, if the review processes, are shorter times on that because again, companies that are, relying on that funding are holding out waiting for approval for some of these grants, right? So
So we're seeing a lot more activity in aerospace and defense industries right now, particularly as Carney's trying to reassert a lot more sovereignty over our supply chain and our defense. What programs do we have that support the companies that serve those markets?
absolutely. So the biggest fit for that would be the Regional Defense Investment Initiative. Now that was launched last year by the federal government. And specifically looking at companies, that are pivoting and getting into, I guess, dual use technologies or getting into military applications, right? And I've had a few of my clients, and specifically in automotive, where I've seen it the most, where, they mostly have the capabilities to be in there's an overlap to some automotive and some aerospace, right? So where they have the capabilities, but they just need to, need a little injection of funding to really open up the doors and be able to provide to that industry. So yeah, the Regional Defense Investment Initiative is the big one that'll provide 50% of project costs up to $10 million. And it comes in the form of an interest-free loan for that program. So again, any companies looking to pivot, or you received a contract from someone in the defense sector, you want to pivot your operations to again offset the volatility or the unknowing of what's happening in your current industry, then that's a great segue, and that'll provide funding into the defense sector. So yeah, it's been open. There's no intake deadline for that until funds are exhausted. And last time that we checked, it is fully topped up and good to go.
Fantastic. One last
Yeah,
thing before we wrap. Canadian companies, small and mid-sized businesses, are lagging a lot of the global competition in terms of advanced automation, robots. I mean, you go to China and Germany and the Nordics, the number of installed robots per 10,000 employees lags significantly. And so
absolutely.
these are the folks we're competing against on a global stage. They're far more automated, interconnected, and their lead times are lower. Their quality in many cases can be higher. Their responsiveness can be quicker. And so uh, Canadian small mid-sized businesses need to catch up. I mean, on the plus side, I think Canadian small and mid-sized businesses, um, in terms of prioritizing investment in digital, are exceeding a lot of their global peers. So this is kind of like a positive indicator. So we're getting called in a ton to help companies set the foundation for eventual automation, interconnection, integrated operating systems and technologies and AI and so forth. setting up business process foundations, data foundations, and really helping the organizations kind of level up and get ready to deliver that connected enterprise. So when it comes to AI and operational modernization and the like, are there any specific programs suited to those types of initiatives?
Absolutely, and that's where I always kind of divert back to the tried, tested, and through federal capex programs that are in place for multiple intakes throughout the year. So I know that the large capex program of focus that we discussed today was the Regional Tariff Response Initiative, right? If you haven't been impacted by tariffs, they're very nominal, but you are looking to increase those operational efficiencies through automation. Then yeah, the regularly occurring capex programs such as the Southwestern Ontario Development Fund, the Eastern Ontario Development Fund. If you're in the GTA, it would be the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Competitiveness Program. If you're elsewhere in the country, there's the Business Scale Up and Productivity programs. Those are all designed for, like you mentioned, said implementations, John. So anything from automation to software, hardware, equipment, and machinery purchases, just to increase your overall competitiveness as a company and your operational efficiencies. Those are open and available right now. I know that the Southwestern and Eastern Ontario Development Fund programs are currently open for intake. The Advanced Manufacturing and Innovation Competitiveness Program is opening in June for its next intake. So those are set in advance. Those are there for the taking, and those can also be stacked with the federal FedDev programs. Now, again, those typically come in the form of interest-free loan programs or interest-bearing loans with forgivable portions, but they're there. They're there for the taking. And it's this, you have clients who have those implementations where it happens all the time where, of course, the non-repayable grant money is preferred, right? But you get an interest-free loan that'll cover half of your project cost that doesn't need to be repaid for, 7, 8, 9 years. Then, it's still pretty favorable because it frees up your own capital to reinvest elsewhere, right? So those programs are there for the taking, and I always recommend them. And they'll be there this year. Like I said, the SWATF, I use acronyms, they're so long, the names, right? The SWATF and EODF programs are currently open for intake until, I believe, end of May.
Yeah, there's so many good programs out there. There's so much there that's intended to help Canadian companies modernize and thrive and grow and stabilize and expand into new markets. I'm hoping through conversations like this and working with you, working with our clients, helping our clients manage the technology vendor ecosystem, we can really help build some critical mass and some momentum to lift industry and the market up. So as always, Eric, I'm super grateful for your willingness to jump on and educate our audience on what's going on in the world and how they may benefit from this stuff. Any final parting thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. My advice that I always say to everybody is, anytime that you're investing in a company, that you're spending money, reach out or ask if there's any funding programs that can offset those costs. I say that this year is going to be unparalleled in terms of the amount of funding programs we see, just because of what's going on in the world, right? So these budgets are put in place to offset global impacts that are currently happening in Canada, right? So it's going to be a very, very busy year for funding programs, and I'd be hard pressed if there wasn't a program available to that fits a current need that a company has. So there's always going to be ongoing open intakes across the board for all the different buckets of funding this year. So just it's again easy to kind of get caught up in day-to-day business operations. It's not in the front of your mind, right? So and then next thing you know, it's too late, right? It's all forward facing. They sometimes have set intakes and deadlines and everything. So just ask initially when the project comes to mind. Let's see if there's a funding program that can match that project.
Amazing. Eric, as always, thanks a ton. Look forward to having you on again in a few months. Sounds like things are going to be shifting. There's going to be some new stuff to talk about. So if you're willing to come back, we'd love to have you. And for Eric Peeney at Ryan, I'm John Gross with Pemeco. Thanks again.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.